Do you have any Star Wars related art, music, short stories, bookshelves, or toy collections? We would love to give you a feature either on the show or a social media post. You can submit your content to starlordspodcast@gmail.com or send us a DM if you just search the Star Lords Podcast on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter. We would also like to thank all of our supporting listeners for helping to make this show possible. If you would like to become a patron, feel free to sign up on patreon.com/starlords, where you will get access to the private Facebook group, the Star Lords Jedi Academy. Also, don't forget to give us a 5-star rating and review on iTunes, as well as subscribe on your podcatcher app so you don't miss any episodes. We are also on YouTube, so make sure to hit the like and subscribe button. All right, let's get into the show.
You are listening to the Star Lords Podcast.
I find your lack of faith disturbing.
Are you stuck-up, half-witted, scruffy-looking nerf herder?
But I was going into Toshi Station to pick up some power converters.
Mandalorians. In 5 millennia, the Mandalorians fought with and against 1,000 armies on 1,000 worlds. They learned to speak as many languages and absorbed weapons, technology, and tactics from every war. And yet, despite the overwhelming influence of alien cultures and the absence of a true homeworld and even species, their own language not only survived, but changed little. Their way of life and their philosophy remained untouched, and their ideals and sense of family, of identity, of nation, were only strengthened. Quote, Mandalorians, Identity and Language, published by the Galactic Institute of Anthropology.
Mandalore, a polysemic word whose meaning refers to a title and a place. In the Mandoa language, it means both sole ruler, as head of the Mandalorian people, as a war leader, and is also the name of their adoptive homeworld. From this word comes Mandalorian, meaning, quote, sons and daughters of Mandalore. Mandalore I settled the new homeworld of his future children. He wore a distinctive war mask as his crown of office, a tradition that future Mandalores would retain for a time. His name also became synonymous with the position of supreme leader. The title, along with his mask, was passed down from leader to leader. Future Mandalores inherited their position or took it through strength of arms. Typically, Mandalore would have the addition of a distinctive epithet to describe the leader or their actions. Eventually, the tradition of passing down the mask faded into obscurity, and in later years a new Mandalore only needed the general support and recognition of the people. When they first arrived, they encountered the massive dragon-like mythosaur. They drove this megafauna to extinction and replaced it as the apex predator of Mandalore, their first conquest. The Mandalorians adopted the skull of the mythosaur as an almost universally recognized sigil. Mandoa, the language of the Mandalorians, is universal among the Mandalorian diaspora. Other uniting cultural threads are their signature armor, typically characterized by a T-shaped visor, as well as shared customs and warrior traditions. Unlike many other cultures and species of the galaxy, Mandalorians are not defined by their racial characteristics. Instead, the Mandalorians can be composed of any species or ethnicity that is either adopted or invited into the Mandalorian way of life and adheres to their warrior ethos.
Bloody Beginnings.
In the galaxy's early recorded history, the Mandalorians would find their origin on the planet Notron, which would later become known as Coruscant. The species known as the Tong fought a bitter war against humanity's early ancestors, the Xel, for hundreds of years. The ancient Tong were tribal and warlike, following ancestral gods of combat, and were inducted into martial life at an early age. They stood roughly 2 meters in height, and were humanoid, with muscular frames, gray skin, sharp, angular faces with dreadlock-like appendages on the back of the head, and large bony crests on their forehead, and with yellow eyes. They had clawed hands, and were known to be exceptionally resilient and tough. Tong typically lived an 85-year lifespan. The Tong lost the war and were driven off-world by the Xel. They then became semi-nomadic in the Outer Rim, finding refuge on the planet Rune for a time, before migrating to a new world that was uninhabited by sentient life. They would conquer this new world and settle it, being led by a Tong warrior. He would become known as Mandalore. The world's first name was Mandayim, or Home of the Mandalore, but would later be simplified into the word Mandalore in Galactic Basic. The Tong would also rename themselves Mandalorians. The planet Mandalore had a multivariate climate and 2 habitable moons. Unique to the Mandalore system and its worlds was Mandalorian iron, or Beskar in the Mandalorian language. It was nearly indestructible metal that could be shaped into armor and weapons. This would become another unique symbol of Mandalorian identity. After conquering their new home and establishing a new tradition of soul leadership, the Mandalorians continued to expand their reach. They settled Mandalore's moons and beyond, warring with any species that they encountered, sometimes to the point of genocide. These Mandalorians saw a religious awakening in the act of war itself. They abandoned their traditional gods and deified conflict. The Mandalorians adopted the moniker of Crusader, as it fit their new religious identity. During this time, they appropriated the technology for the Basilisk war droid from the Basilician species, one of many vanquished foes. These hulking, quadrupedal, semi-sentient war machines served as mounts for the Crusaders. They were armed with forward-facing batteries of blasters and were also equipped with repulsor lifts and jets, making them useful for both aerial and ground deployments on battlefields. The Mandalorians encountered few who could withstand their military power, with one notable exception: the Mandalorians of the sister world Mandilia. So impressed were the Mandalorians with the combat prowess of these enemies that they allowed the Mandalorians to fight alongside them in new wars. This began the tradition of adopting other species into their society. As the Mandalorians continued their wars of conquest, individuals of other species that showed mettle in combat would be given the option of joining the Mandalorian culture and way of life. The Mandalorians would continue to live in this manner for thousands of years and become readily identifiable for their nature and warlike ways. Many leaders rose and fell bearing the title of Mandalore, but they were a conservative lot, sticking to their ancient customs of war and conquest.
Mandalore the Indomitable. As the warriors began extraplanetary crusades, it would not be long before the Mandalorians would encounter the Sith. During the invasion of the Empress Tita system, the Mandalorians, under the leadership of the Tong Mandalore the Indomitable, found themselves in confrontation with the Krath under command of the Sith Lord Ulic Qel-Droma. Rather than risk his own forces in battle, not to mention destroying potentially powerful allies, Ulic challenged Mandalore to a duel and emerged victorious. More than impressed, Mandalore the Indomitable then pledged his forces to the service of the Sith Lord. The Mandalorians and Sith invaded the Republic and Coruscant itself. During the Sith War, the Mandalorian Crusaders attacked many other worlds, including Onderon and the Jedi world of Ossus. Despite his acumen as a warrior and charismatic leader, Mandalore the Indomitable was slain on the forest moon of Duxan by ferocious beasts. His mask was recovered by a searching crusader who donned it and declared himself a new Mandalore. Mandalore the Ultimate.
The end of the Mandalorian Wars was something new and unknown to us. Revan fought us like a true warrior and defeated us on our own terms. Revan embodied our philosophy and showed us our own weaknesses. Then he exploited them. It was a painful lesson. With Mandalore dead, our weapons taken, and our pride destroyed, many lost their way. But I will change that.
One of the last Tong Mandalores, Mandalore the Ultimate led his people during the Mandalorian Wars. He also adopted the epitaph of the Great Shadow Father. He would reorganize the Mandalorians into the infamous Neo-Crusaders on the moon of Duxun. Mandalore the Ultimate would establish a training complex and summon warriors to his cause, spurred in secret by the Sith, promising the Mandalorians a victory. Mandalore the Ultimate was also burdened with a terrible vision. He saw the extinction of his native Tong species. Their numbers had been devastated from the previous conflict, and the population was no longer viable. In an ironic twist of fate, humans, descendants of the original Zell, mortal enemies of the Tong, became the dominant species among the Mandalorian clans. The traditions of the Tong would continue to live through all Mandalorians. Numerous other species would join the Neo-Crusaders, including Rhodians, Twi'leks, and Togorians, to name a few. Under Mandalore the Ultimate, the meaning of Mandalorian evolved into a living warrior tradition and metropolitan civilization no longer composed of a single species. Mandalore the Ultimate unleashed terrible violence on the galaxy in the name of conquest, initiating the Mandalorian Wars against the Republic. They deployed nuclear weapons against civilians, among other war crimes. The Mandalorians were also able to forge alliances with weapons manufacturers that profited from the onslaught, even trying to weaponize the powerful Exogorth void worms. Despite this violence, the Jedi stalled on entering the conflict, which indirectly led to an internal schism and the rise of Revan. Despite victory after victory, the Mandalorians were finally beaten when the Revankists entered the war, and Mandalore was slain by Revan himself in single combat. As he lay dying, Mandalore the Ultimate revealed the betrayal of the Sith, who had used the Mandalorian people to test the strength of the Republic and act as a vanguard before they would reveal themselves.
Mandalore the Preserver.
We don't have a word for hero. Being prepared to die for your family and friends, and what you hold dear, is a basic requirement for a Mando. It's not worth a separate word. It's only cowards we had to find a special name for.
Quote, Balton Carrid. After their defeat at the end of the Mandalorian Wars, the Mandos were left directionless, leaderless, and adrift. Mandalorian clans would follow varying pursuits, often violent. They earned livings as bounty hunters, mercenaries, and bandits, while others migrated back to their homeworld of Mandalore. Some created smaller settlements on distant and formerly conquered planets and moons. It was during these dark times that a new Mandalore would rise. Mandalore the Preserver. Formerly Canderous of Clan Ordo, he was a human veteran of the Mandalorian Wars. Serving for a time with Revan, Canderous would fight against the re-emergent Sith who had used and betrayed his people. Together with Revan, Canderous would recover the lost mask of Mandalore and assume the role of Mandalore the Preserver. He learned from a dying Tong warrior that Mandalore the Ultimate had been a usurper imposed by the Sith. After the Jedi Civil War, Canderous joined a Jedi exile named Mitra Surik in her own quest against the Sith. With her help, Mandalore began reuniting the lost clans and resurrecting the warrior spirit of the Mandalorian people. His work would remain incomplete, however, and the Mandalorians would continue to be fractured for another 300 years.
Mandalore the Lesser.
We don't need him or his Darmanda. He should feel shame bearing that brand, not pride.
Do they all hate Mandalorians that much?
Depends. Lots of reasons someone might get cast out. Some wish they could become Mando Ade again. Guessing he doesn't.
When the reconstituted Sith Empire returned to the galaxy, they first went to the scattered mercenary Mandalorian clans for help to challenge the galactic order instilled by the Republic. They were justifiably refused, however, considering the Sith's past treatment of the vaunted warriors. It was then that the Sith plotted to instill a new puppet Mandalore, a relatively unknown Mandalorian gladiator fighting in the pits of Geonosis, was suddenly elevated, through Sith tampering, to Mandalore. As Mandalorian culture dictated, the clans would be summoned to their new leader's cause, and as a Sith puppet, the new Mandalore would act at the behest of the Sith Empire, leading the Great Galactic War. The Jedi, now actively defending the Republic, no doubt scared by the memories and legacy of the Revan-Kiss hundreds of years before, went to war against their penultimate nemesis once again. The new Mandalore, who would later become known as Mandalore the Lesser, as a pejorative because of his subservience to the Sith and illegitimate ascension, was challenged to a duel and killed by his successor by Artis of Clan Locke. As per tradition, he assumed the Mandalore title. Renaissance, industrialization, and the Clone Wars.
Here's why you can't exterminate us, Aruedi. We're not huddled in one place. We span the galaxy. We need no lords or leaders, so you can't destroy our command. We can live without technology, so we can fight with our bare hands. We have no species or bloodline, so we can rebuild our ranks with others who want to join us. We're more than just a people or an army, Aruedi. We're a culture. We're an idea. And you can't kill ideas, but we certainly can kill you. Quote, Rena Te Nast, addressing the Consul of Luon.
During the Republic's Dark Age, the deadly Kandorian plague swept across Mandalore and further eroded their military strength, opening their homeworld to raiders, pirates, and bandits. It was at this time that a new Mandalore arose, known as Mandalore the Uniter, who summoned many nomadic Mandalorians back to their homeworld to rally a defense and rebuild. It was then that Mandalore began to establish itself as an industrial power and began flourishing in more ways than just warfare. However, They kept and adapted their warrior mindset to industrialization and chose to remain independent of the Republic and unbeholden to any powers of their own. In an act of fear, because of their long history as enemies, the Republic and the Jedi initiated a devastating alpha strike against the militarizing and technologically advancing Mandalorians, leaving much of the planet as permanent wastelands and spawning a faction of traumatized Mandalorians into pacifists, calling themselves the New Mandalorians, who outright rejecting their warrior heritage, culture, and past. This new faction would advance technologically and rise to dominance, and yet parallel and in opposition with traditional Mandalorians. Mandalorian space included many worlds where their warlike practices were carried on without hindrance. Those that continued with their militant ways called themselves the true Mandalorians, in opposition to the new Mandalorians. The splintered clans often warred with each other, and larger sub-factions emerged, such as the Death Watch and Super Commandos, among others. Jaster Muriel, a former journeyman protector from Concord Dawn, joined the Mandalorians and rose to the rank of Mandalore. Jaster attempted to hone the Mandalorians into an elite yet honorable mercenary society, and instituted the Super Commando Codex as a way to reform the bloodier and brigandish behavior that had plagued the warriors. The Codex reaffirmed many of the ancient traditional tenets of the Resul Nar. The Death Watch, under Tor of Clan Vizsla, and the Mandalorian pacifists rejected the Codex, and war became inevitable. This era had been dubbed the Mandalorian Civil Wars, which resulted in the true Mandalorians almost becoming extinct due to infighting as well as at the hands of Jedi intervention. A lone warrior named Jango Fett survived one such Jedi-led slaughter, and he would continue the practices of his people with his clone son Boba, along with imprinting much of Mandalorian heritage among the clone troopers of the Galactic Republic, in addition to other Mandalorian traditionalists that served as trainers for the clone army. In another twist of fate, these clones would serve on the side of the Jedi and almost wipe them out, in return at the conclusion of the Clone Wars. Meanwhile, the Mandalorians on their homeworld, including the pacifist New Mandalorians and the Ascendant Death Watch, became engulfed in a second civil war, and following clan wars just prior to the Clone Wars that further diminished the number of traditional Mandalorians, with more clans joining the New Mandalorians, who themselves now sought a seat at the Galactic Republic. Mandalorians as a people remained fractured as the Clone Wars swept across the galaxy, with various groups being represented amongst peaceful independents, mercenaries, and active combatants on both sides of the conflict. As the war continued, Mandalore again found itself divided by its clan system and culturally devastated. It was at this point that the Mandalorians would again find solace in their traditional ways, as a leader rose again to bring the Mandalorians back to their roots as a warrior culture, in no small part thanks to the seeds planted in the cultural identity of many clone troopers that found themselves back on Mandalore during and after the war, carrying both the genetic legacy of the Fett clan as well as the ideological legacy of the old Mandalorian warriors. Some Mandalorians re-emerged under the title of the Mandalorian Protectors, under the leadership of a former clone ARC trooper and native Mandalorian by the name of Fen Shaisa. By the war's end, Mandalore had been devastated, and the new Mandalorians had been all but destroyed, in no small part thanks to the machinations of the Sith, who once again abused their relationship to the Mandalorians, and in this case being led by a former Sith apprentice for a time.
Rise of the Empire.
Mandalores aren't administrators. Mandalorians can run their own communities, anywhere. They just need general leadership when it's called for.
Quote, Boba Fett.
As the Empire ascended, the Mandalorians made special concessions to the Empire and served in some special capacities as mercenaries. The overall trend was towards isolationism, however. Others, like Boba Fett, would keep the deadly reputation of Mandalorians alive in the galaxy as a bounty hunter. Others campaigned to resurrect the old ways of crusade and conquest. In the end, the Empire would again betray the Mandalorians as they began strip mining Mandalore for its precious Beskar deposits and enslaving the locals. This triggered a severe counterattack as the Mandalorian supercommandos warred with the Empire during the Galactic Civil War. After the fall of the Empire, the Mandalorians would find themselves on better terms, yet still independent of the Galactic Alliance of Free Planets. They would eventually yield to the leadership of Boba Fett. He used his royal pedigree to claim the title of Mandalore. Fett, leaning on his own long history as a nomad, made the Mandalorians into a mercenary force. They initially appeared to ally themselves to the Zhongbong when they invaded the galaxy. However, they did so only to act as saboteurs from within. After defeating the Vong alongside the Galactic Alliance, the Mandalorians would seek to rebuild. Their world had been devastated yet again by the Vong menace. Mandalore would undergo another period of rehabilitation, with the call of nomadic Mandalorians to return to the homeworld. Through a mixture of private enterprise and nationalization, the Mandalorians rebuilt themselves and made a corporate alliance with the Verpine, an insectoid race of talented engineers. The Mandalorians would also continue to serve the galaxy and make money through mercenary work. They later turned into official intelligence and elite security roles with the Galactic Alliance.
Philosophy and culture.
Early Tong religion worshipped the destruction god Kad Ha-Rangir, who represented change and was a rival of the slothful god Arasum. This would eventually evolve into the worship of war itself as a divine embodiment. Early Mandalorian crusaders would identify as religious warriors and followed the canons of honor. These codified laws governed their behavior. Glory, combat, family duties, clan and personal honor were all considered the highest goals. 6 tenets would go on to be utilized as a foundation by almost all Mandalorians. Notable exceptions to Mandalorian orthodoxy were the new Mandalorian pacifists. The 6 Mandalorian laws were called the Rezol Nar, translated to the 6 actions. These were 1. Wearing armor, 2. Speaking the language, 3. Defending oneself and family, 4. Raising your children as Mandalorians, 5. Contributing to the clan's welfare, 6. When called upon by the Mandalore, rallying to their cause. Ancient Mandalorian crusaders believed that to not follow the tenets rendered one soulless. This was the original state for all creatures prior to joining the Mandalorians. Without a soul, one could not pass into the Manda, their afterlife. These traditions were later modernized and re-established by Mandalore Jaster Muriel, who wrote the Super Commando Codex for his disciples. This text regarded the Mandalorian spirit as a collective soul that all Mandalorians join after death. Mandalorians were united under these tenets, rather than through shared biological characteristics. They now prioritized the actions of the individual. Mandalorians were largely nomadic, both on the world of Mandalore itself, but also within the enclaves they established on conquered worlds across the galaxy. Some populations stayed away for generations at a time. Mandalorians prioritized their nomadic capabilities, both as a military tactic as well as a tradition. This made them notoriously difficult to wipe out. Mandalorians valued possessions that they could take with them and invested little in permanent housing. They typically did not mark great calendar celebrations, as their nomadic lifestyles tended to disregard various seasonal or calendar-marked occasions. Mandalorians tended to celebrate personal dates, such as births, marriages, and deaths. Funerary traditions like internment were absent from the culture. Their pragmatic devotion held little regard for vacant vessels such as corpses. Cremation or mass graves were commonplace, but not before salvaging the armor and equipment of fallen comrades, as a mark of memory and respect. Because of their proclivity to warfare, violence was endemic, or perhaps a necessary process, in the Mandalorian political system. Successors could legitimately overthrow their predecessors through arms and be recognized as the new Mandalore. This led to many civil wars and wars of succession amongst the clans.
Weapons and armor.
I was one of the best youth warriors in the clan Ordo in my time. No one before me had mastered the power of our basilisk war droids as quickly as I had. Except Mandalore himself, of course. In those days, we were sweeping across the Outer Rim, destroying all who fought us. Young Mandalores would prove themselves in real combat with unknown opponents above 1,000 worlds. Each brought back stories of his achievements.
Though it has come in various designs and modifications over the centuries, it remains the most telling symbols of a warrior's cultural ties and allegiance. So notorious were Mandalorians that outsiders would instantly recognize their armor and assume the wearer to be one of the infamous warriors. Its rarity, legacy, and intrinsic value, when made from real Beskar metal, was almost priceless. Being pragmatists, however, they did assign monetary value to Beskar, starting at 30,000 credits for a set, and often more. Some Mandalorian armor was manufactured from durasteel or other composite metals instead. It has come to be regarded with a spiritual awe within Mandalorian tradition, and would be a Mandalorian's most prized and personal possession. Early Mandalorian armor often incorporated mythosaur and other bones, adding a uniquely primitive design. Mandalorians would see their armor as a second skin. Armor could be painted in a variety of colors, and for a number of reasons. For some, their colors reflected accomplishments, goals, or states of being. Gray equaled mourning a lost love. Red equaled honoring a parent. Black equaled justice. Gold equaled vengeance. Green equaled duty. Blue equaled reliability. Orange equaled a lust for life. White equaled a new start. Jag eyes were a sigil painted on armor of a Mandalorian who showed particular bravery and was bestowed by a clan chieftain. Clone troopers of the Grand Army of the Republic painted this symbol on their armor. Other sigils, like clan symbols or mythosaur skull, could also adorn a warrior's armor. In other cases, armor colors were unified to show allegiance to a faction or clan, such as those following Darth Maul or Jaster's super commandos. Other times, color and patterns were shown based on practical camouflage. A warrior's preference for a color could also be enough. During the Neo-Crusades, armor color signified rank. Ironically, Mandalorians, when they were still only Tong, at first thought of armorless combat as the highest honor. Fighting naked was far more dangerous, and therefore more glorious. This practice was abandoned after the discovery of Beskar, and perhaps after many needless casualties. Mandalorians would often use jetpacks in battle, a tool that increased a warrior's mobility and complemented their shock infantry fighting style. Jetpack troopers wore the kama, a short half-skirt that protected the back of a user's leg from jetpack downwash, as well as battlefield shrapnel, and another tradition instituted by the clones of the Grand Army of the Republic. Similar to the Mask of the Mandalore, the dark saber, a unique black-bladed lightsaber, was also used as a symbol of succession for a time by some clans. It was taken as a war trophy from defeated Jedi. It is a testament to the martial skill of Mandalorians that they could effectively wield such a notoriously difficult weapon without force sensitivity. From their nuclear capabilities during their crusading days to common Vibro and Beskar blades, a Mandalorian was rarely without a weapon. Weapon systems such as wrist-mounted energy shields, flamethrowers, mounted rocket launchers, and hidden blades were integrated into their armor. The Beskad, a Beskar blade, with its finely honed edge, was a highly prized and venerable. The Beskar-imbued Mandalorian Crush Gauntlet enhanced a warrior's strength. It splintered bones as though they were dried twigs, bent metal, and could even catch and hold a lightsaber's plasma blade. Basilisk's war droids allowed the Mandalorian superior tactical flexibility and the element of surprise when invading a world, not to mention obscene levels of firepower. Using these mounts fell out of favor over time, and the war droids had become exceedingly rare in the galaxy. Mandal Motors would produce starfighters in homage to the ancient machines. The Verpine worked with the Mandalorians to produce lethal Verpine shatter weapons. The Westar line of blaster weapons was a favorite among the likes of Jango Fett and the Death Watch. Mandalorians were also known to design their blasters, Ripper and Disintegrator weapons. The Mandalorians also established their own manufacturing arm, Mandal Motors, that would design ships and other weapons manufacturers that would design blasters and tanks, such as the Galar series, Mandaltech, Mandal Hypernautics. And now, a word from our sponsors.
Is it better to be feared or respected? I say, is it too much to ask for both? With that in mind, I humbly present to you the jewel of Mando Industries' Conquest line. It's the first missile system to incorporate the latest in proprietary repulsor technology. They say that the best weapon is the one you never have to fire. I respectfully disagree. I prefer the weapon you only have to fire once. That's how Dad did it, that's how Mandalore does it, and it's worked out pretty well so far. Find an excuse to let one of these off the chain, and I personally guarantee you the bad guys won't even want to come out of their planets. Mandel Industries. Peace through superior firepower.
Welcome aboard the Millennial Falcon. It's Christian joining you with
Sam
and Jordan.
And we're here to talk about the infamous, the notorious, the legendary Mandalorians.
No, notorious.
Indeed.
First things first, Fett. We need to deal with the giant mythosaur-sized elephant in the room.
Let's actually just deal with mythosaurs. I'm very disappointed that you didn't dive into
more
mythosaurs.
into them. Okay, we'll get there.
True.
You know what? Let's start.
It's not like our podcast
logo
or anything. It's a mythosaur.
If anyone needs a reference for what that looks like, yes, our logo is a mythosaur skull.
Yeah.
Okay, let's start with mythosaurs then.
They could get to like the size of a city, right? Like they were
massive.
These were crazy. Like
they could get that big.
Yeah.
They ranged in size from yes,
but the biggest ones were like bigger than any fantasy novel dragons you ever see.
Well, you haven't read Tolkien, my friend. There are bigger, but yeah, they were huge. So for the Mandalorians to genocide the entire species was
kind of impressive, to be honest.
And that's why they adopted the symbol, right?
Although you kind of imagine that maybe they had to do that in order to survive
on that planet.
If this planet is filled with
mythosaurs
things like this.
Yeah. But yeah, and obviously it's a favorite of ours. Well, mine personally. Hence the logo. So
I don't really know anything else about mythosaurs other than their size.
I'll probably do a lore post on them. That's why I was kind of saving content for them, was for the lore post during the week. So keep your eyes peeled for that. The Fett family clan. There is massive fan debate whether or not Jango and Boba Fett are actually Mandalorians. This is mostly due to some rewriting. Mandalorians.
Or you mean like Jango and all of the clones?
The clones would by default, whatever Jango is, would follow suit.
Which would include Boba.
Yeah, being a clone.
Yeah.
A big part with Mandalorian history and culture, it sits in an awkward space between Disney canon and Legends canon, because the Clone Wars was actively, ended early under Lucasfilm and then was revived by Disney.
Yeah.
So how much of that counts for both universes? That's why there's a lot of crossover with like Darksabers and the Mandalorian pacifists and all that stuff. It sits in a weird place between worlds. So we kind of have to draw from elements of both Disney canon and Legends canon to complete the story. And in the Disney show, they kind of discredit the Fett clan as being not Mandalorian. It comes from a character whose reputation is also questionable, so whether or not he's lying or defaming Jango's character is unknown. So can we take his words at face value? Hard to say.
What is his argument for why
it's just like it's a throwaway
a
line where he says that Jango Fett was just a pretender, using the Mandalorian armor.
Oh, okay.
As the reputation,
stolen valor.
Right, exactly. But again, that character that says that is also a dubious character himself. So was he just trying to defame another honorable Mandalorian? In the Legends universe, the Fetts are very ardently, strongly Mandalorian. There's no question. But moving forward into the Disneyverse and the comments by this character who exists in both Legends and in canon, does bring that question up. Also, the fact of George Lucas's direct involvement in the Mandalorian storyline also kind of lends credence to the Disney argument of like, well, the Fett's claim is dubious. Part of that comes from George Lucas never intended Boba Fett to actually be a Mandalorian. That is true. He was supposed to be like a rogue bounty hunter who uses the armor because the armor has a history, and like he kind of like Jango, or like uses a reputation to kind of precede him.
Yeah.
In the Marvel comics, there's also a storyline that takes place after the Battle of Endor, where there's a bounty hunter who's doing just that. He gets a replica made of Boba Fett's armor and claims to be Boba Fett.
Yeah, until Boba Fett actually catches up with him.
And then because everybody thinks that he's dead at that point.
Yeah. In our live chat, so just so everyone knows, we are gonna start to live stream our discussion portions if people want to hop in. one of our commenters says that mythosaurs are big and Django is not a Mandalorian. That's
well,
his
you
opinion.
sir are wrong.
Hot take.
I'm about to tell you why.
Okay, give it
So
to
the
us.
Fett's clans go back, at least in legends, as far back as the Old Republic. There are notable Fetts who have existed in Mandalorian culture. Django's origins, he comes from a moon called Concord Dawn, which is in Mandalorian space. He's not born a Mandalorian, but he's adopted by Mandalorians as a war orphan, which is a valid practice in Mandalorian culture. And then by that extension, obviously, Boba Fett, all the clone army and stuff carry those Mandalorian traditions, are trained by Mandalorians and adopt their culture and history as their own. And a lot of them end up on Mandalore after the war.
Yeah.
And that is also part of the confusion as to Boba Fett's identity, because you have so many clones with the same face wearing Mandalorian armor in the galaxy doing stuff, right?
Yeah.
So, yeah. So and then obviously by the end of it, Boba Fett himself does become Mandalore later on in Legends canon.
Yeah.
So he is Mandalorian as far as I'm concerned, and as far as the evidence, at least in the Legends universe, is concerned. Disney can go any direction they want moving forward now, because a lot of my sources are now invalidated by their canon. But still, really their only argument is one that George Lucas never really intended for Fett to become a Mandalorian, but he was by virtue of every other Legends source. And
when he created the character of Boba Fett, was his armor was intended to be Mandalorian, though?
Yes, the armor was always going to be Mandalorian.
The Mandalorian culture was already an idea that he had.
He didn't really have a lot about Mandalorian culture. To him, the Mandalorians were just like supposed to be mythical super commandos. That's as far as Lucas cared for it, and then he kind of handed it off to the Legends people to develop and stuff. And then a lot of it came, even actually the Christmas special featured Boba Fett quite a bit and started to build that legend. And then the gun even that Boba Fett uses made its way all the way into the Disney Mandalorian TV show, that like dual-pronged disintegrator gun that comes from the Christmas special. So there's a lot of nods back and forth. I'm curious to see if the new Mandalorian TV show will visit this concept. There's a lot of people saying that Tamora Morrison will appear in this season of The Mandalorian. So they might might settle the discussion of whether or not Fett is or isn't in the Disney canon of Mandalorian.
Yeah.
If the rumors are true, which is hard to say. But yeah, as of right now, it's a big fan debate. Like I said, in the Legends universe, he absolutely, without a doubt, is a Mandalorian, regardless of what Trader says. Next thing on the docket, we'll talk a little bit about the Mandoa language. Mandalorians, being like a very strong warrior culture, take the tradition of many warrior cultures in other fictions. You have the Klingons and you have the
Predators,
Dothraki. We'll get to the Predators in a second.
Okay.
Klingons and Dothraki, who both have full languages written for their respective peoples. Someone took it on themselves to write out the Mandoa language. It's not complete, but they have like a lot of the structure down.
I don't know about the Dothraki yet, because I'm not a nerd.
Oh no, not on the Star Wars podcast.
But the Klingons also have like a very distinctive style of armor and very distinctive like weapons and that kind of thing as well.
Yeah, I imagine there's a lot of overlap and influence based on like that warrior, honor-bound warrior culture.
And like the Tong as well, the original Tong, they've got those pronounced forehead ridges.
Yeah, so the Tong I see as a combination of Klingons and Predators actually, and they're
because of the dreads.
Yeah, the dreads, which I no doubt was an influence in their, at least their look, if not their culture. Which leads us nicely into the next segue.
I also wanted, because we're talking about Star Trek.
Yeah,
I think that the Klingons culturally, the only similarity is the war thing, but Klingons are sort of portrayed as drunken samurai pirates, kind of like they're much more fast and loose than the Mandalorians, who are much more like disciplined, austere, stoic dudes. And there's another Star Trek race, though. It's in they come in Voyager, the Voyager series. They're called the Herodians, and they're like a race of hunters. That's like their big thing. And they've also got like super distinctive, like teal colored armor, or no, it's not teal, it's kind of like aqua blue. And they sort of run around killing the most dangerous animals in the galaxy. And they've got like big skulls of mythosaur-like creatures inside their ships and stuff.
Okay, so maybe they're more like that then.
Or
a combination.
It's
I'm sure
just
there's
another.
a lot of overlap.
I just wanted to talk more about Star Trek on our Star Wars
Get your own podcast.
Someone in the chat said Mandalorians remind them of Scythians of the
Scythians, of real life or
of like the Star Wars universe.
I don't even know who those are. You one-upped us on nerddom.
Yeah,
They're
like talking Scythians in real.
Yeah, like the Scythians.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay, I thought you meant Scythians and stars. I'm like, I never heard of Scythians.
No. Like that would be sort of their analogy.
Yeah, I don't know a lot about
analog.
Scythians specifically or Scythians. If you could fill us in on what you see as the parallels, but I was going to actually dive right into real life cultures that are reminiscent of Mandalorians. And obviously this bit is open to interpretation because there's no real hard source. Mandalorian culture and identity has been written about by multiple authors, so who's to say what inspired which author? The most obvious tenets, though, are things like their armor looks very Corinthian Greek.
Yeah, that's true.
They're kind of a lot of their cultural norms and things. Ever since Tamora Morrison was brought on board as Jango Fett, ironically enough, they seem to have adopted a lot of Maori, like even in their language, a lot of the apostrophes and the language structure they use is Maori, and Maoris are known to be like a warrior people. I think a lot of like their songs and things are also like reminiscent.
What was that Spike TV show back in the day?
Deadliest Warrior?
Warrior.
Where they fight each other?
Who did the Maori fight? I know they did a Maori episode at one time.
Yeah.
I can't remember if they won or not. But I imagine that most of the
they got to do like a fantasy
Mandalorian versus everyone else.
Dothraki.
Yeah, no, just like take two.
There's a YouTube series that does that. It's called Versus, I think, and they'll like pitch any heroes against each other, like Batman versus like
I think I know that.
Yeah, and they like animate them and stuff. They're pretty cool.
Okay,
shout out to that YouTube channel. Shout us back. Anyways, sorry. They also have like Mongolian elements, especially with a lot of the nomadic culture, the mounts into battle, and the basilisk war droids. Even their huts, the yurts that they build, are like these. There's pictures of Mandalorian traditional housing, and it looks a lot like Mongolian buildings. The biggest one that's new, and this one is actually stated by I can't remember who it was working on the Disney Mandalorian. But Viking culture has actually started to make its way a lot into the Disney version of Mandalorians, which have a lot of parallels still with Legends Mandalorians. Just, like I said, Mandalorians sit in a really weird, awkward space between worlds. A lot of what the Mandalorians appear in the Clone Wars series are very Viking-esque. Not so much their philosophy, which we'll get to in a second, but they're all like very blonde and like Nordic looking, and a lot of their elemental designs are Nordic. And then even you see in the Mandalorian TV show, I forget what she's called, but like
the
runs the
blacksmith.
forge. Yeah. She's got like the very Viking-esque look. And it was explicitly said by one of the showrunners that they are following a more Viking tradition with them.
Do you know why they went that creative route?
I honestly don't know.
Because Vikings are hot right now.
Yeah, that could very well be.
Yeah, it could just be
Vikings
in
are
vogue.
Yeah. And they are, any Viking fans out there will recognize Vikings as like another warrior tradition that garners a lot of historical respect.
I don't hate that idea. However, like you said, like the helmet just screams like
Spartan.
Yeah.
Corinthian.
Yeah.
If anything.
Yeah, like Greece to me. Like I don't know. It's hard for me to see Viking.
Well, she wears like a fur cloak.
Yeah,
right?
she
does. Yeah. But that's the first depiction of that kind of Mandalorian I've seen.
Yeah. I really couldn't tell you what the thought process is beyond what it is. Beyond that, the next thing I did want to compare and contrast a little bit the Mandalorians of Disney versus the Mandalorians of Legends. A lot of the traditional Mandalorian things look like they've been thrown out. The whole Mandalorian pacifist thing that did start in the Legend side and then transferred over to the Disney side by Dave Filoni, who otherwise has done impeccable work on the Clone Wars, but this is one of my biggest pet peeves. I'm a huge Mandalorian fan. Mandalorian pacifists are such a kick in the
it is
groin
odd
for any Mandalorian fan out there.
Like who wrote that in Legends?
So
Whose
apparently
idea
Lucas
was it?
himself had a hand in
Really?
making the Mandalorian pacifists. Yeah.
man.
And then also in the show they're depicted again very like uniform. They're all blonde, white humans.
Yeah.
And the Mandalorians were known to be very like not
Metropolitan.
Yeah, exactly. Ethnically and specific, right? They have
Yeah.
other species, they have tons of races, like
Right.
those things don't matter to them. So it kind of like flies in the face of everything built up prior of Mandalorian culture and history, everything from being warriors
Yeah.
to their like diversity of species and peoples
Yeah.
to becoming this uniform pacifist society was
It's
just
definitely an
such-
odd, like, philosophical divergence
Yeah.
to put it. And like, what is the motivation for these pacifists to really?
It was the devastation of their planet.
Yeah,
but that like, I don't know. To me, it's such a far cry.
Isn't that what made like a lot of the Mandalorians more warlike though?
You would think,
yeah,
right? But
I think there's if you look into a lot of the lore in Star Wars, you see like very homogeneous cultures. Like it's like everybody in this civilization
does X,
does X, and they only do X.
Yeah.
And I think if you even look at some of the cultural inspirations, like ancient Greece, perhaps for the Mandalorians, like they had pacifists too in ancient Greece,
Sure, so
right?
you're trying to-
Even though they were making war generally constantly on each other.
yeah, or even like every city state had its own kind of philosophy. Right?
Exactly.
Like Athens was nothing like Sparta versus nothing like Corinth.
But they were all Greeks,
right? Well, also that's debatable because Greece itself as a concept didn't evolve
I
until
think
later.
I think
but-
I could more easily accept like sort of rogue Mandalorians
Then-
who have rejected the Mandalorian way, you
Yeah.
know, and as opposed to like a whole clan of pacifist Mandalorians.
It's more than a clan too. Like we're talking like massive cities and almost becoming like the face of Mandalorians being pacifists, which I absolutely despised personally. And
it would if that ever like caught on, like as like a depiction of Mandalorians, it does feel like it would sort of take away from what you expect them to be.
Yeah,
you know?
exactly.
Or what they've been established as.
Yeah, and that has thankfully been kind of changed. The pacifists seem to have been like, I don't know if this was done on a metaphysical level or like trying to prove a point of like, does pacifism work? But they eventually become overpowered by the actual warlike Mandalorians too.
Yeah.
The Death Watch, which also has its roots in Legends canon. The Death Watch fought the Super Commandos under Jasmariel, which was Jango Fett's group, and there was a civil war there. And then that Death Watch evolved into being the nemesis of the pacifist Mandalorians. It's all very complicated. You could do a whole episode just on the distinguished lines in this Clone Wars era and pre-Clone Wars era, which maybe in the future we will, but trying to save time for the sake of speed here. Towards the end, and in the Disney canon in Rebels, the Death Watch seem to be the predominant Mandalorians by the end of it. So they go back to their warrior traditions and cultures.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I just wanted to say my piece on that because that's been irking me for years. A little bit, yeah.
Got anything else?
The Mandalorians and the Sith. They have a long history of being allies or being used by the Sith. Stooges, yes. There's a lot in their cultural identity that seems to overlap, which would make sense as to why they would ally. They both like admire strength and combat, right? So even though they don't have the same philosophy,
they are temperamentally similar.
aligned, right? So
and you have that sort of exile thread running through them as well, right? The Mandalorians lost a war and were exiled essentially to the far reaches of space,
just like the Sith,
just like
or
the Dark Jedi,
who found the Sith Empire.
Listen to our Sith episode.
Yeah.
We'll explain it all there.
Yeah, so they have a lot of parallels, which obviously, even though the Sith use and abuse the Mandalorians, they often find themselves on the same side more often than not, and become like the secondary nemesis of like the galaxy as a whole.
Yeah.
You'll find like the Mandalorian Wars, Mandalorian conquests are the thing that devastate the galaxy or plunge it into its own wars prior to the Sith.
Wasn't Cassius Fett the guy who used nuclear weapons as well?
He was, yeah. A notable Fett, that's what I'm saying. They have a long history.
And that was in like 4000 BBY.
Yeah. So
Yeah, but one of the things like about Mandalorians is it seems like they don't really hold grudges. They
respect the person that beat them.
If they get defeated, it's almost like an honor to be defeated by their better
warrior,
right? Yeah.
Which is true to their culture and their history.
Yeah, totally.
Final note just on the Mandalorian tradition now instituted by Disney with the removal of the helmet. That is new.
Yeah.
That wasn't a thing before.
Why did they do that?
I think they're just trying to make their own spin on it. They're trying to leave the Disney brand on Mandalorian.
I feel like they could have, like, if they're going to do it, like, do it in, like, the series finale when they're wrapping up the whole show or something. Not in, like,
reveal his face.
Yeah, not in the first season. Like, come on.
I don't know. Maybe there's a plot element they're going to, like, bring back with that.
Yeah.
Who knows?
I was a little jarred.
It's strange
when they did that.
It kind of like throws a lot of canon, even in the movies and stuff. Like, and that leads to questions about Jango Fett's heritage because he's walking around without a helmet. He makes a whole army with his face.
Yeah,
right?
Yeah, it's true. Like, it's true.
Again, we don't know in Disney canon if Fett will be considered a Mando or not, but if he is, it's now odd that he was walking around showing off his face and stuff.
Yeah.
I think it's actually paralleled. They took the idea from Boba Fett being that mysterious gunslinger, because in the original trilogy, Boba Fett never takes off his helmet. And everyone always wonders what Boba Fett looks like under the helmet. Fans for years have been speculating: is he an alien? What's he look like?
Jango Fett, that's what he looks like.
Well, we know that now, but before we didn't.
Yeah.
So maybe that has a lot to do with it, trying to resurrect that kind of mystery of like, oh, why does Boba Fett not remove his helmet? Oh, because it's a cultural tradition.
Yeah.
Could go either way. We'll kind of see where they go with that.
Yeah.
I'm personally excited for it. I like the new Mandalorian.
I do too. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's a good show, but I would say not a perfect show.
No. I
completely
a good show. Agree. But there's nothing in it that devalues, like, even though it's different, the Mandalorians aren't going to be the same Mandalorians that we know and love. They'll probably have no Tong elements, or even their language is probably going to be rewritten and thrown out. Except for Beskar. Beskar seems to be a staying element, which
I think the IG droid doesn't get his due as being an awesome character in that series.
We'll cover that in the
I
IG
love the
episode.
IG droid. He's hilarious.
You don't think so? I thought they did.
No, I mean, people don't give it because
give him the respect.
He's a great character.
Yeah.
But it's all
I see what you're saying.
But it's all about Baby Yoda and
I like
Werner Herzog, I guess.
Werner Herzog. I do like the role they gave the IG droid, and that they actually
that's such
gave him some airtime,
And it's such a deep cut to the IG droid because he's in exactly 2 frames in the first trilogy.
But people who are really familiar,
people like us know exactly how important he is.
Yeah, we know these IG assassin droids are unbelievably lethal, right?
And they have a whole history.
Yeah,
of characters like IG-88.
They were not designed by the same people who did the Confederates droid armies.
Yeah, exactly. One of these could annihilate an entire platoon of droid armies.
Well, so can Jar Jar Binks. So that's not saying much.
Not a high standard. That does actually quickly remind me of another thing that it looks like the Mandalorian show picked up from old Legends content. The Mandalorians that dislike droids. So the Mandalorian in the TV show really dislikes droids.
Yeah.
So in Legends, that goes back to that Mandalore that was killed by a bunch of droids, and it became a mark of dishonor, and Mandalorians no longer trusted droids. And
that's why the Basilisk war droids
that
for
was
the longest time.
That was previous to
obviously,
this.
but it's they have an established history of being cool with droids.
And then they flip-flop. Yeah,
I think the Mandalorians are they're flip-floppers, Christian.
They're not a stable people, even though they
don't know where they stand.
You know what? I'm not opposed to that. But that's
they're weasels. Space
Do you
weasels.
have anything positive to say about any faction there, Sam?
I have as many positive things to say about any factions as you do about Disney.
Oh, that doesn't sound good. All right, but shy of that, I think we should pay a visit to Mandalore itself.
Let's go. Let's be with you.
Thanks for flying with us. We are interested to hear from you. You can reach us at starlorspodcast@gmail.com. Let us know your thoughts, comments, or corrections. If you enjoyed the show, please leave us a 5-star rating, review, and subscribe. You can also help us out through our Patreon at the Star Lords Podcast. Find us on Instagram, the Star Lords Podcast, on Facebook at the Star Lords Podcast, on Twitter at the Star Lords Podcast, and on YouTube, Star Lords Podcast. We'll catch you next time.